The cold winds howled through the mountains as the storm grew stronger. In a small, isolated cave, two figures huddled together for warmth. The alien woman, Aria, held her young daughter, Lila, close to her chest. They were cold, hungry, and exhausted. The journey from their destroyed village had been long, and they had nowhere else to go. Aria's skin, a soft shade of lavender, had been exposed to the harsh winds, making it even more difficult for her to keep her daughter warm. Lila, her bright golden eyes wide with fear, trembled in her mother's arms. Her small hands gripped Aria tightly, as if she was afraid that if she let go, she would be lost in the storm. "We can't stay here much longer," Mama Lila whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "It's too cold." Aria didn't reply immediately. She knew her daughter was right. The cave wasn't enough to protect them from the storm, but it was all they had. The storm had come out of nowhere, and they had been forced to seek shelter in the nearest cave they could find. She stroked Lila's hair softly, trying to comfort her, though she was scared too. They had been running for days, ever since their village was attacked. A group of hostile aliens had come, destroying everything. In their path, Aria and Lila had barely escaped with their lives. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud noise outside the cave. It wasn't the wind. It was someone moving through the snow. Aria stiffened, her senses alert. The storm was too fierce for anyone to be out there, unless it was someone with a purpose. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to listen more closely. A sudden thought struck her. Could it be the ones chasing them, the enemies who had attacked her village? Her fear only grew stronger, but then the noise stopped. Aria's eyes scanned the entrance of the cave, her breath coming out in short, shallow bursts. She slowly stood up, still holding Lila, and crept toward the entrance, careful not to make a sound. The storm outside was fierce, but there was still a chance that someone might be close enough to hear them then. Through the snow and wind, she saw him, a man, tall, strong, and covered in layers of clothing. He was wearing strange armor, something Aria had never seen before. But what struck her the most was the weapon slung over his shoulder. It looked like something she'd seen in the military records from her home planet, but she wasn't sure. The man didn't seem to notice her at first. As he walked past the cave entrance, trying to stay hidden from the elements, but when he paused, his sharp eyes quickly scanned the area. His gaze met Aria's, and for a brief moment, they just stared at each other, as if neither of them could believe what they were seeing. The man blinked and took a few cautious steps forward. His voice, rough but kind, echoed in the quiet storm. "Are you okay?" Aria froze, not sure whether to speak or remain silent. Her first instinct was to run. But where could she go? Oh, and would running help? She didn't know who this man was, and she couldn't afford to trust anyone. After what had happened to her village, Lila, sensing her mother's hesitation, tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, he looks nice. He's not like them." Aria looked down at her daughter, who was looking at the man with wide, trusting eyes. Lila was always hopeful, always seeing the good in people. But Aria knew better than to trust strangers easily, especially not after everything they had been through. The man seemed to understand her hesitation. He stepped back, giving her some space. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I'm just trying to survive this storm too. You're not alone." Aria felt a spark of relief, but it was quickly replaced by caution. He spoke with kindness, but she couldn't be sure. The storm outside was still fierce, and it was getting colder. She didn't know how much longer they could stay in the cave. After a long moment of silence, Aria nodded slowly. "We're not alone."
We're
"Freezing, my daughter. She's so cold." The man's eyes softened. "I can help with that. I've supplies. I'm a soldier used to harsh environments. I know how to survive out here." Aria was still unsure, but the warmth in his voice made her consider his offer. She glanced down at Lila, who was still shivering in her arms. "I'll keep her safe," the man added, as if reading her mind. "I promise." Without another word, Aria slowly moved aside, letting him into the cave. The man stepped in cautiously, his eyes immediately taking in the cold, dark surroundings. He pulled out a large bag from his back, opening it to reveal warm blankets and food. "Here," he said, handing her a thermal blanket. "This should keep you both warm for now." Arya hesitated, but then took the blanket, wrapping it around Lila. The warmth felt like heaven against her cold skin. Lila sighed in relief, her trembling stopping almost immediately. "Thank you," Arya said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. The man smiled, settling down near them. "No problem. You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." For the first time in days, Arya felt a small sense of peace. The man seemed genuine, and she knew they couldn't survive the storm alone. Still, in the back of her mind, she kept wondering who he really was and what he wanted from them. But for now, there was no more time to question. The storm was still raging outside, and they needed all the warmth they could get. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the cave, the warmth of the thermal blanket slowly spread over Arya and Lila. The man. Jack had started a small fire in the corner of the cave using some of the wood he had gathered. The crackling flames provided a welcome glow that made the cave feel a little less cold and isolated. Arya sat close to the fire, her back resting against the rocky wall. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, who was still nestled in her lap, finally feeling the warmth after so long. Lila's golden eyes, which had been filled with fear, now seemed a little more peaceful. She had stopped shivering and was slowly falling asleep. Jack sat a little farther from them, leaning against the wall of the cave, quietly observing. He wasn't used to being around others, especially strangers in such a remote place. Yet he could sense the exhaustion and fear in Arya's eyes. She had been through a lot, just like him. But he knew his survival skills were no match for what they had already endured. Arya finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, as if she were unsure whether she should speak. "Thank you for helping us," she said, looking at Jack. "You're a soldier," you said, nodded, his face serious but calm. "Yes, I was. I'm with a group of researchers from Earth, sent to study this planet. But I'm also a survival expert. Grew up in tough conditions, learned to take care of myself." Arya looked at him closely, her eyes narrowing slightly, trying to understand the man in front of her. She had heard stories about Earth. The humans who lived there were known for their resourcefulness and determination. But she had never expected to meet one, especially not in such a strange place. "You're not from here?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "No," Jack replied. "I'm from Earth. This place, it's nothing like home. But I've learned to adapt. You don't get to survive out here by sitting still. And you certainly don't leave people behind." Arya's mind raced. She wasn't sure what to think of this human. His words sounded kind, but she knew better than to trust easily. That she couldn't ignore the fact that he had helped them when no one else had. He had saved them from freezing, given them food and warmth, fought off the alien creature that had attacked them earlier. For a moment, the two simply stared at each other across the fire, the flickering flames dancing between them. Then, Arya's eyes softened. "You don't know what it's like," she said quietly. "To lose everything, to have your home, your people, destroyed, and to be alone, with no way to fight back." Jack shifted slightly, his voice steady. "I can't say I know exactly what it's like, but I've seen loss. I've seen destruction. No one should have to go through that." So Arya didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced down at her daughter, who was now asleep in her arms. Her small face, peaceful and relaxed. Arya's heart ached as she watched Lila sleep so soundly, unaware of the dangers that had been hunting them. She could only hope that one day her daughter would grow up in a world where there was peace, not fear. "I've heard stories about humans," Arya said after a moment. "Some say you are strong, others say you are dangerous. But we've never met a human before?" Jack smiled faintly. "I guess it depends on who you ask. Some people think we're the heroes, others think we're the villains. In the end, we're just trying to survive." Arya studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't know if I can trust you completely, but I'm grateful. For now. I have no choice." Jack didn't seem offended. He just nodded. Accepting her caution, he understood. Trust wasn't something that could be given easily, especially when one had suffered so much. He wasn't sure what had happened to Aria's people or where she was from, but he knew one thing for sure. He would protect her and Lila as best as he could. They deserved that much. I understand, Jack said quietly. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just offering my help. You don't have to owe me anything. Aria nodded slowly. You're kind. For a human, Jack chuckled. We can be kind, I promise. But we can also be tough when we need to be. Earth has its share of dangers too. The conversation lulled as the two of them sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled, the only sound in the cave. As the storm raged on outside, the storm was starting to subside, but the cold still clung to the air. It would be dangerous to leave the cave too soon. After a while, Jack spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. I'm going to help you get to safety. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I won't leave you behind. Aria looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. And where will we go? I don't trust many places, and certainly not those chasing us. Jack paused, then replied, I know a place. It's a human outpost. It's not far from here. It's safe, at least for now. Aria didn't respond immediately. She had doubts, but the thought of being in a safe place, away from the chaos, was a tempting one. For Lila's sake, she had to consider it. We'll stay here for tonight, she said finally. Tomorrow, we'll follow you. But I need to know more about you, about Earth, ... and why you're helping us. Jack simply nodded. I'll tell you what you want to know, but right now, we need rest. Tomorrow, we can start the journey. Aria lay back against the cave wall, pulling Lila closer. The warmth from the fire and Jack's kindness made her feel a little less afraid. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to close her eyes and drift into a light sleep.
Always say.
Knowing that maybe, just maybe, they weren't completely alone in this cold, dangerous world. The storm had finally begun to calm down by morning. The howling winds that had battered the cave all night long were now nothing more than a gentle breeze. Outside, the snow still fell thick and heavy, but the worst of the storm had passed. Aria woke first, feeling the warmth of the fire and the steady rhythm of Lila's breath beside her. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this safe, but despite the comfort, she knew they couldn't stay in the cave forever. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Lila, and moved toward the entrance. The snow outside was deep, and the cold still bit at her skin. She pulled her hood tighter around her face and glanced back at Jack, who was still asleep near the fire. The human had kept his promise to protect them during the night, but now Aria was starting to feel a growing unease. She couldn't stay hidden forever. Her enemies were still out there, looking for her and Lila, and if they couldn't find shelter soon, the harsh conditions would kill them just as easily as the alien warriors that had destroyed her home. Aria glanced at Jack once more. She had to make a decision. Should they trust him? Could they really go with him to the human outpost? She wasn't sure. She had to stay cautious. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise. A sharp crack echoed in the distance. Something large had stepped on a twig or branch. Aria stiffened, her eyes narrowing. She motioned for Jack to wake up, but was careful not to alarm Lila. Slowly, Jack's eyes fluttered open. What is it? He whispered, noticing the tense look on Aria's face. I heard something, Aria replied quietly, her voice laced with worry. We need to leave now before they find us. Jack didn't hesitate. He quickly grabbed his bag and began to gather their things. The fire, which had been burning steadily for hours, was quickly extinguished, leaving only the faintest trace of smoke in the air. He handed Aria a few more supplies, making sure they had enough to last them until they reached the human outpost. Lila began to stir, blinking sleepily and rubbing her eyes. Mama? She asked softly. What's going on? Bria knelt down beside her daughter and smiled, trying to reassure her. We have to leave, little one. But don't worry, we'll be okay. We're going to follow Jack. He's going to take us to a safe place. Lila nodded, still confused, but she trusted her mother completely. She knew nothing else but to follow her wherever she went. They moved quickly, silently, as Jack led them toward the back of the cave. The snow was deep, but the mountain paths ahead were still passable. The dangerous part, however, was getting to them without being seen. Aria's heart raced as she heard the sounds of footsteps growing louder. Jack led the way, moving with a quiet confidence. He was used to being on the move, but even he could feel the weight of the situation. He wasn't sure who or what was following them, but he could sense the danger. Aria's calmness in the face of fear was both impressive and unsettling. She was used to surviving in hostile conditions, but Jack didn't think she realized just how dangerous the world they were in had become. The galaxy was full of unknown threats, and his knowledge of Earth wasn't going to be enough to protect them for long. They made it to a narrow pass between two cliffs, their only path forward. Jack glanced behind them one last time, scanning the area. He had a bad feeling in his gut, but there was no turning back now. They had to keep moving. Then a figure appeared in the distance, barely visible through the falling snow. It was tall, with long, spindly limbs. Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Get down," Jack hissed, pushing Aria and Lila into the snow behind the cliff. He pulled out his weapon and raised it carefully, his fingers steady, despite the fear growing. Inside him, Aria grabbed Lila and shielded her with her body, crouching low to the ground. She knew exactly what was happening. The alien warriors had found them. The figure moved closer, its shape becoming clearer. It was one of the creatures from Aria's world, a deadly predator, known for its strength and agility. It was a tracker, trained to follow its prey across vast distances. Aria had seen them in action before, but never this close. The tracker sniffed the air, its red eyes scanning the area. Jack tightened his grip on his weapon, but he knew there was no way they could fight this creature head-on. Their only chance was to stay hidden and wait for it to move on. Aria held her breath, watching the creature closely. It was almost upon them. Then, just as it passed their hiding spot, Aria made a split-second decision. She whispered to Jack, "We have to move now. It's our only chance." Jack nodded quickly and motioned for them to follow. With the creature distracted, they moved swiftly, using the snow-covered terrain to conceal their steps. Jack led the way, keeping a low profile. Every noise felt amplified. Every movement could give them away. They reached the edge of a small cliff where they could see a narrow path leading down the mountain. It was steep and treacherous, but it was their only hope. Jack glanced at Aria. She looked like she was about to speak, but Jack cut her off with a quick gesture. "Not now," he whispered urgently. "We'll talk later. Keep moving." They made their way down the path, with Jack carefully guiding them. The tracker wasn't far behind, but it hadn't noticed them yet. The path was getting steeper, and Jack knew they needed to move faster. Aria's heart was still racing. She could feel the heat in her chest as she clutched her daughter tightly. The storm had passed, but the danger was far from over. The path down the mountain was treacherous, the snow growing deeper with each step. Aria's legs burned from the effort, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to stop. Lila, still holding her mother's hand tightly, was exhausted, but her determination was stronger than her fatigue. Jack led the way, moving carefully through the thick snow. He glanced back at Aria and Lila every few seconds to make sure they were keeping up. His military training had given him an edge in navigating harsh environments. But even he was starting to feel the weight of the journey. The tracker had not given up, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they would be forced to face it again. "You're doing great," Jack said to Aria, his voice steady but low. As he turned back to check on them, Aria nodded, but she didn't respond. Her mind was racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. They had been running for days, with no clear plan of where to go. Ouch. Jack was the first human she had ever met, and she was beginning to trust him. But there were still too many unanswered questions. She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut that there was more to his offer of help than he was letting on. Aria's gaze moved toward the rocky cliffs above them. They were hidden for now, but if the tracker found their trail, they wouldn't have much time left. She had to figure out a way to protect Leela. Her daughter was too young to survive another attack. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice tense. "Where exactly are you taking us? What's this place you keep mentioning?" Jack looked over his shoulder, meeting her eyes for a moment. His face was unreadable, but he understood her concern. "It's a human outpost," he explained. "A place for Earth's researchers. It's not far. We'll be safe there." Arya didn't fully trust him, but the thought of reaching safety was too appealing to ignore. Still, she couldn't stop the questions in her mind. Why had Jack found them here? What was so important about her and Lila? He had helped them, yes, but she wasn't convinced it was out of the goodness of his heart. "I'm not sure you understand," Arya said, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't know what's following us. These creatures, they will stop at nothing to hunt us down. If we go with you, we'll be putting everyone at risk." Jack didn't seem surprised by her warning. "I know. I've seen their kind before. I didn't think I'd run into one on this planet, though. Not many people survive encounters with those things." "You didn't answer my question," Arya replied. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." Jack stopped walking. For a moment, considering her words, he set down his bag and turned to face her. "I don't know, to be honest. Maybe it's because I can't stand seeing people suffer, even if they're not from my world. I've spent a lot of time in places where no one cares about anyone. Else, seeing someone like you and your daughter, I just couldn't walk away." Arya studied his face, trying to read the truth in his eyes. There was something in his voice, something genuine. He wasn't like the other humans she had heard about, those who only cared about their own kind, no matter the cost. Jack had put himself in danger to help them. But why? Before she could speak again, the sound of crunching snow reached her ears. The tracker was getting closer. "Stay quiet," Jack whispered urgently. "Shh. We need to move faster." They quickened their pace, pushing through the thick snow. Jack led them into a small ravine, hoping the narrow path would give them some cover. The tracker's footsteps grew louder, and Arya could feel the tension in the air. Her heart raced. They needed to get to the outpost. They needed to get there. But then, something unexpected happened. The snow around them began to shift, and a loud roar echoed through the ravine. Arya spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. The tracker had found them. The creature was massive, its red eyes glowing in the dim light of the storm. Its claws dug into the snow as it moved closer, its powerful limbs carrying it with terrifying speed. Jack raised his weapon, preparing to defend them, but Arya stepped forward before he could react. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I will handle this." Jack turned to her, confused. "What are you doing? It's too dangerous." But Arya wasn't listening. She stepped closer to the creature, her posture calm and controlled. Jack could see the confidence in her movements. This wasn't the first time she had faced danger. She was a fighter, just like him. The tracker hesitated, as if it could sense Arya's strength. She took another step forward, her eyes locked on the creature's. She raised her hands, signaling for it to stop. For a moment, the two stood there, facing each other in a tense standoff. The tracker growled, its sharp teeth bared. But Arya didn't flinch. Instead, she lowered her hands slowly, her voice calm but firm. "Leave us," she said, her words cutting through the air. Jack watched in awe as the creature hesitated once. More than, with a final growl, it turned and disappeared into the snow. Vanishing as quickly as it had come, Arya took a deep breath, her body relaxing as the danger passed. She turned back to Jack, her face unreadable. "Get moving," she said, her voice soft but commanding. Jack stood there for a moment, stunned. He had never seen anyone face down a creature like that so calmly. It was clear now that Arya wasn't just a survivor, she was something more. She was strong, more than he could have ever imagined. "Right," Jack said, his voice filled with respect. "Let's get out of here." They continued on their journey, moving faster now, with the outpost just within reach. The storm had nearly stopped, but Arya knew that their true challenge was only beginning. Whatever lay ahead, she would protect her daughter, and she would do whatever it took to keep them both safe. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold still cut through the air like a blade. Arya, Jack, and Lila had made it through the most difficult part of their journey, but they weren't safe yet. Jack knew the outpost wasn't far, but the tension in the air told him that danger was still close. They had narrowly escaped the tracker earlier, but the creature wasn't the only threat out there. "We need to hurry," Jack said, glancing over his shoulder. "I don't like the way the wind's picking up again. We don't have much time." Arya nodded, her face set in determination. She had learned to read the weather in the harshest conditions, and she could feel the storm returning. It wouldn't be long before they would have to face another challenge. The only thing they could do now was push forward and pray the outpost was still standing. Lila, who had been walking quietly beside her mother, spoke up. "Mama, are we safe now?" Arya looked down at her daughter, her heart heavy. "We're getting closer, sweetie. Just a little longer." Jack led the way, his pace steady and sure. Arya walked behind him, her eyes scanning the area constantly. Every sound, every shift in the snow, had her on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The thought of their enemies still being out there, hunting them, made her want to run.
Out.
But she knew they couldn't outrun what was coming. They had to stand and fight. As they continued on, the path began to slope downward, leading them into a narrow ravine. The ground was slick with ice, and the walls of the ravine towered above them, blocking out the last traces of light. The only sound was the crunching of snow beneath their feet and the distant howls of the wind. Then, without warning, the silence was broken by the sound of movement ahead. Arya stopped, her senses immediately on alert. She motioned for Jack to stop and raised her hand to signal him. Jack turned back, his eyes questioning. Arya's gaze was fixed ahead and Jack's grip tightened on his weapon. "I heard something," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible. "Get ready." Jack nodded and checked his gear, preparing for whatever was coming. His military instincts kicked in. He knew that in a situation like this, they couldn't afford to make mistakes. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the shadows ahead, moving quickly through the snow. Arya's heart skipped a beat. It was another tracker, just like the one they had encountered earlier. Jack stepped forward, his stance ready, but Arya held out a hand to stop him. "Wait," she said urgently, "this one is different." The figure emerged from the shadows, and Arya's eyes widened in recognition. It wasn't just any tracker, it was one of the commanders. It's a leader of the group that had been chasing them since they left their village. The commander was tall and imposing, his body covered in thick armor, with a long weapon strapped to his back. His red eyes locked onto Arya's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Arya," the commander said, his voice deep and cold. "You can't run forever." Arya's pulse quickened. She had known this moment would come. She had been trying to outrun them, but she couldn't hide forever. She turned to Jack, her voice steady but urgent. "He's the one who destroyed my village. He's the reason we're running." Jack's eyes narrowed. He'd heard the story from Arya, but seeing the creature up close made it all too real. He stepped in front of Arya and Lila, his weapon ready. "Now, you don't have to do this," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You can leave now, and we won't follow you." The commander chuckled darkly, his eyes flashing with amusement. "You think you can stop me? I am not afraid of you, human. You're weak. You're nothing compared to what's coming." With a sudden movement, the commander drew his weapon, and the air was filled with a low, menacing hum. Raising his own weapon and firing a warning shot into the air, the blast echoed through the ravine, but the commander didn't flinch. Instead, he grinned. "You'll have to do better than that," the commander said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Before Jack could fire again, the commander lunged forward faster than Jack had expected, but Arya was quicker. She stepped in front of Jack, blocking the commander's path. "You're not getting past me," Arya said firmly, her eyes glowing with determination. The commander paused, a look of surprise crossing his face. "You're a fool, Arya," he sneered. "You think you can stop me?" Arya didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the pouch at her side and pulled out a small, glowing object, the artifact that had been the cause of everything. The commander's eyes widened in recognition. "The artifact," he hissed. "You still have it." I will never let you have it, Arya said, her voice full of defiance. This is the key to saving my people. Won't let you destroy it, commanders. Expression darkened. He reached for his weapon, but before he could react, Jack lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. The two men struggled, their weapons clashing as they fought for control. Arya watched the fight unfold, her heart racing. She had to act quickly. She couldn't let them get the artifact. In one swift motion, she grabbed the artifact and held it up high. A bright light filled the ravine, blinding them both. The commander froze, his eyes narrowing as he struggled to see. With the artifact glowing in her hands, Arya took one step back. The light intensified, and for a brief moment, everything around them seemed to tremble. Commander's grip on his weapon loosened, and he stumbled backward. We're not the ones who are weak, Arya said, her voice strong and unwavering. You're the one who will fall. The light from the artifact grew brighter, blinding the commander completely. He let out a final, guttural roar before collapsing to the ground, unable to move. Arya stood there, her body shaking with the effort, but victorious. Jack rose slowly, his chest heaving as he watched the commander fall. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. You did it, Jack said, his voice filled with awe. Arya turned to him. The light from the artifact still shimmering. In her hands, it's not over yet. We have to keep moving. The others will come. The air was still cold, but the storm had passed, leaving behind a peaceful quiet. Arya, Jack, and Lila moved through the snow-covered landscape, each step bringing them closer to safety. The fight with the commander had been intense, but now it was over. The tracker and his allies were gone, at least for the moment. They had survived. For now, that was enough. Jack led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Arya walked beside him, her hand still holding tightly to Lila's. The little girl, though exhausted, was walking on her own now, no longer needing to be carried. She was strong, just like her mother. Arya's mind was still racing. The artifact. In her hands had been a beacon of hope, but it was also a heavy burden. It was the key to saving her people, but it had caused so much pain and loss. She didn't know what the future held, but she couldn't let the past define her. Jack glanced at her, noticing the troubled look in her eyes. You okay? He asked gently. Arya took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, she said softly. I think so. It's just... Everything has been so hard. I don't know if I can keep going. Jack stopped and turned to her. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you. We're in this together. Arya's heart felt a little lighter at his words. She had spent so much of her life running, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid of what was coming next. But Jack's presence, his support, felt different. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the first time in a long while. She allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack smiled and turned back to the path ahead. They continued walking, the snow crunching beneath their feet. The journey was far from over, but at least they were no longer alone. They had each other. As they moved forward, Arya couldn't help but think about her people. Her home planet had been destroyed, her family scattered, but she still held on to the hope that she could rebuild, that she could protect what was left of her world. And with Jack by her side, maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for a new beginning. The outpost was in sight now, a small, well-hidden structure that had been built for Earth's researchers. Jack had told her that it was a place of safety, a place where they could rest and recover. Arya had never been to Earth, but she could already see how different it was from her own world. The humans, despite their flaws, had built something solid, something that could withstand the dangers of the universe. As they approached the outpost, Arya felt a mixture of hope and fear. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of peace. She had made it this far, and with Jack's help, she would keep moving forward. Lila looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with curiosity. Mama, what's that place? Arya smiled and crouched down to her daughter's level. That's our new home, Lila. It's a place where we can be safe. Lila's face lit up with excitement. A new home? Will there be other kids there? Arya chuckled softly. I'm sure there will be. Maybe even some new friends. Jack, who had been walking a little ahead, turned back to them. We're almost there, just a little further. Azaria nodded and stood up, taking Lila's hand once more. They walked together, their steps now lighter. The weight of the world seemed to lift just a little with every step they took. When they reached the outpost, Jack led them inside, where they were greeted by a group of humans who had been working there. The building was warm with bright lights and the smell of food in the air. It was a far cry from the cold, isolated world they had been fleeing. Welcome, the woman said, her voice warm and welcoming. We've been expecting you. Arya felt a mix of relief and caution. She didn't know these people, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. Jack introduced Arya and Lila to the others, and they were shown to a small room where they could rest. The humans offered them food, blankets, and clothes. Arya looked at the simple comforts they provided and felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had made it. They were safe. As Arya and Lila settled into their new room, Arya couldn't help but think about the journey ahead. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, and they had a long way to go before they could truly rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of hope. Jack knocked on the door before stepping inside. How are you both doing? He asked. We're okay, Arya replied. I think we'll be fine here. Thank you, Jack, for everything. Jack smiled. You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad I could help. You both are safe now, and that's what matters. Arya looked at him, her heart filled with gratitude. She had never imagined that she would find someone like him a human, someone who had risked everything to help them. And now she realized she had found something even more important, a chance at a new life, a chance to build a future with hope, with family, and with friends. We'll get through this. Arya said softly, more to herself than to Jack. We'll rebuild. Jack nodded. Together. And as the sun set outside the outpost, Arya allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she and her daughter had found a place where they could finally heal. A place where they could start again, free from fear and the past that had haunted them for so long.